All right, welcome back to the Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a chapter from an ancient letter, Hebrews chapter 8, that makes a pretty bold claim. It basically says God decided to scrap his original agreement with humanity and replace it with something, well, something way better. Let's break down why. The writer of Hebrews kicks things off with this huge, kind of mind-bending question. I mean, think about it. What if everything we see and experience is just a copy of the real thing? It's like the difference between a blueprint and the actual building or a shadow and the person casting it. One is temporary, just a pointer. The other is the real, permanent substance. And getting this idea is really the key to unlocking this entire chapter. Okay, so here it is, laid out plain and simple. The whole argument in this chapter really hangs on this one powerful contrast: shadow versus substance. The old way of doing things, that was the shadow. It was earthly, it was temporary, it was just a copy. But the new way? That's the substance. That's heavenly, eternal, the real deal. All right, so let's dig into this idea of the shadow first, which is all about the earthly tabernacle. To really get why it's considered just a copy, we have to look at how it was made in the first place. But hang on. Before we go any further, there's a key word we gotta get our heads around: covenant. You're gonna hear it a lot. So what is it? Well, you can think of it like a super serious binding agreement, kind of like a contract. And in this case, we're looking at two major agreements between God and humanity. See, the text makes a really big deal about this. When Moses built that original tabernacle, the portable tent for worship, he was specifically told to follow a pattern that was shown to him on the mountain. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that the earthly building was never meant to be the final ultimate reality. It was a physical model, a copy, a shadow of something way bigger and more perfect in heaven. And this whole idea, the heavenly original versus the earthly copy, it sets up a whole series of direct comparisons between the old covenant and the new one. So first up, where did all this happen? Well, under the old system, everything took place in a physical tent that was, built by human hands. But in the new system, the ministry happens in a heavenly, true tent, one set up by the Lord himself. It's a really clear contrast between what's man-made and what's divine. Okay, next up, the priests themselves. The old system had a whole line of human priests from the tribe of Levi, but their service was temporary, right? It had to be passed down from father to son. The new system, on the other hand, has one single eternal high priest, Jesus, who is now sitting in the ultimate place of honor and authority, at God's right hand. And this, right here, is probably the biggest difference of all: what was actually being offered. The old priests offered animal sacrifices over and over and over again. It was something external to themselves. But Christ's offering was totally different. He offered himself once for all time. It was a single, perfect, and deeply personal sacrifice that never, ever needs to be repeated. So you might be thinking, where did this whole idea of a new and better system even come from? Was it just a surprise? Well, not at all. It turns out this massive shift was actually the fulfillment of a really powerful promise that was made centuries earlier. The author here actually goes way back, like hundreds of years, and pulls a quote from the prophet Jeremiah to make his case. God himself had announced that a new covenant was on its way. And why? Because the first one had a critical flaw. And the flaw wasn't with God, it was with the people, who just couldn't keep their end of the bargain. So what is it that makes this new agreement so revolutionary? And let me tell you, it's not just some minor update. This was a complete overhaul of the entire operating system, and it was all based on changing people from the inside out. It really boils down to three huge, groundbreaking promises that completely redefine the relationship between God and humanity. And wow, these are total game changers. First, the law isn't on external stone tablets anymore. It gets written directly on people's hearts and minds. It becomes part of who they are. Second, knowing God isn't for a select few priests anymore. It becomes direct and personal for everyone. And finally, forgiveness becomes total and permanent. I mean, just think about that last promise. I will remember their sins no more. Can you imagine the freedom in that? Okay, so that sounds great, right? But how? How does a law get written on your heart? Well, the key, which other prophets like Ezekiel talked about, is that God would actually put his own spirit inside people. You see, under the old system, that was incredibly rare.
reserved for specific people for specific tasks. This idea of God's own presence living inside every single believer, well, that was a totally radical, brand new reality.
So when you put all of this together, it leads to one pretty unavoidable conclusion. If you've got something new that is so obviously better in every way, what does that mean for the thing that came before? And the author here does not pull any punches. He says that by even speaking of a new covenant, God himself is making the first one obsolete. He describes it as growing old and ready to vanish away. This wasn't an accident. This upgrade was the plan all along. And that leaves us right where the author wanted his audience to be, with this really powerful question that still rings true for us today. Once you have the real thing, the actual substance, why on earth would you ever choose to go back to living in the shadow?